Greetings, I am not Scott Zahn. Welcome to What is Epicor Eclipse, some of its general background and design. Eclipse is billed as an enterprise resource planning system designed specifically for wholesale distributors of electrical and plumbing supplies. Even though it is called an enterprise resource planning system in the similar league with, say, SAP and Microsoft Great Plains, I would really not call it that because most conventional ERP systems are very general purpose and allow you to write customized applications and customized business processes, where Eclipse is very hard-coded. All of the business processes are pretty much set in stone with some tweaks allowed. This Wikipedia article on Eclipse ERP gives you a pretty good overall background of the Epicor Eclipse ERP product and some of its history. What's not so much mentioned, and I'm given to believe that the original programmers that wrote Eclipse came from Infor Shims, the supply house information management system, and was based on the same underlying architecture but on mini computers instead of PC servers. As I'm given to understand, in the first 12 years of Eclipse's existence, it was a privately held company. The staff that was Eclipse was extremely tight-knit, very, very well trained, and knew their product inside and out, and you got spectacular customer service. They even went as far as actually using the Eclipse product in their tech support trouble ticket system. In the last 10 years, unfortunately, Eclipse has bounced around from owner to owner to owner, with the current owner apparently being a investment holding company called KKR and Company. Every time this software has been bought out, the new owners have had the fantastic idea of trying to squeeze more revenue out by firing most of their support staff and changing their developers' focus. This has been an extreme frustration for those people that have put a substantial investment in the product. It is not my intention to dissuade you away from buying the Epicor Eclipse product, but I do want you to be aware of Epicor as a company, some of the architecture and issues that you'll deal with. I can say from 12 years of being an Eclipse tech support and user that it is probably the most reliable, low maintenance, and actual joy to use product that I've experienced in my career. But Epicor, every time it changes hands to a new owner, there's a huge mix-up in support, and that causes a great deal of frustration. It is also not a cheap product to maintain. The monthly maintenance can get rather exorbitant, but compared to the alternatives, it's probably reasonable. Now, speaking of alternatives, what do you have? And honestly, the top two products for electrical and plumbing distributors are both owned by Epicor. So you have Profit 21 and you have Eclipse. The other possible products out there to consider would be Xtuple, which is a derivative of an open source project. NetSuite, which is owned by Oracle. If you're a small shop, you could consider Intuit QuickBooks Enterprise. Or if you want to be adventurous, you could try a product called Compeer, which is something that I've been following for several years. Each one of these solutions, including Eclipse itself, has its own variety of issues. Profit 21, even though it's a well-established product, users tend to tell me they don't like it because it's overly complicated. Xtuple is an unknown. I don't know anyone that's ever used the product extensively in electrical distribution. It being open source based, it should be very customizable if you have access to programmers, but on the other hand, it's also perhaps overly simplistic, not as rich feature set as you'd like. NetSuite, I've never heard anyone say anything really useful about NetSuite. an awful lot of expense for not a whole lot, apparently. Definitely not well suited for electrical distribution. QuickBooks Enterprise gives you an awful lot of bang for your buck. It's probably one of the cheapest solutions you can get, but it's not very good for any type of security. It's not going to be able to calculate commissions, it's not going to be able to come up with complex pricing matrices, and it's not terribly good with inventory management. If you've got to start somewhere, it's a good place to start, but you know, I would consider it a step-through product. Compere, architecturally, from my understanding, has probably got the best underlying architecture, and it was influenced by the developers of SAP. It started out as an open source product that's now become a closed product. There is an open source version, I believe, that was much more limited in features. From a techie's point of view, I would consider this the most interesting product to look at, but you've got to have an awful lot of tech smarts to implement it, because it's not going to come out of the box already pre-configured, where Eclipse is really a no-brainer. You just kind of drop in and train your staff. I do not know anyone that's ever tried Compere for electrical distribution, but I would love to see someone do that and give it a try. Okay, now on to architecture. One of the things that you have to know with Eclipse, because it will influence everything that you do from the time you put it in onwards, is that Eclipse is a PIC system, which is a very old piece of technology. The PIC system was developed by this handsome gentleman here by the name of Dick Pick, who died in 1994. It is a database system, sort of. The PIC system was actually intended as an operating system on mainframe computers. You literally erased whatever software the mainframe came with and put PIC in its place. And it was an entire database / development environment for writing business applications in. A very clever piece of technology at the time, but keep in mind the time was 1968. Since that time, since the passing of Dick Pick in 1994, there's been an awful lot of turmoil. The product has not evolved a whole lot. In some ways, just to keep it going, but nothing miraculous. It is what's left of the PIC system is currently owned by a company called Rocket Systems, a small company of 1,200 people. This is not their main product. This is one of many of the products that they do. They do mainly mainframe applications. It is important to note that the PIC system predates SQL Server and SQL 92 by many years. In many ways, it's kind of the grandfather of SQL. Because a lot of the ideas that became SQL started in something like PIC, but then were fully fleshed out in the new relational database models. PIC is not what you'd consider a relational database. It's considered a co-relational or correlated database, which we'll maybe get into later. Now, the reason why I harp so much on this being a PIC system is that it causes several issues going forward. As I said, the Eclipse software, which is really compiled PIC basic scripts for the most part in a PIC system called Universe, owned by Rocket Systems. It is a very solid system, but it's very, very old technology that predates SQL. As I said, the PIC system kind of stopped evolving for the most part with the death of Dick Pick, and it's kind of lurched along in a zombie life ever since. The fact that it was so good and so solid, there are still applications out like Eclipse that use it. But the downside is that it is not a robust environment for the future. There is an interesting video on YouTube called The History of the PIC System, which I see is posted by Mark Pick, I presume probably Dick's son, or at least some relative, which will give you a good background of it, and you get the idea for how old a system you're looking at here. there's several books that were written on the PIC system and PIC Basic for writing applications. Keep in mind that the latest book that was ever written on PIC was 1990, and there hasn't been anything since. SQL and other variant databases, have taken over the past 30 years or so, and left the PIC system in the museum where it belonged, actually. This becomes a problem only in when you go to do normal maintenance. When you have to do customizations, you find you have a very limited group of people that you can hire to do customizations. Most of the time it's only Epicor. If you have to do any type of deep database involvement, well, good luck finding a PIC Basic programmer, because most of them would be in their 70s by now. The architecture, even when you try and understand how it's doing what it's doing, it's very difficult because you're dealing with what was an operating system that was fiddled with a bit to make work in Unix. So the architecture is typically a Red Hat Linux operating system as a host, then loading you into the Universe PIC system, and then most of what you're doing is either in Universe or interacting with Universe. This makes for a very strange architecture for all the enhancements and additional modules that Epicor Eclipse has released over the years. In my opinion, the Eclipse system's greatest weakness, and probably its greatest strength, is the reliance on the PIC system database. Not because it's a bad technology, it's just a very outdated one. In a world where you can find thousands of SQL database programmers and architects and people that know how to write programs to access SQL very easily, you'll find almost nobody that knows how to access a Universe PIC database. The whole structure itself is very unusual to what you would expect in normal relational databases. And so if there are any customizations, or if there's any type of low-level stuff that needs to be done with the PIC database, you're limited to a few consulting companies or Epicor. You're not likely to find anyone off of Craigslist that's going to know this stuff. At the risk of being either too vague and or wildly inaccurate, I'm going to try and explain a little bit of the big difference between the SQL and the U2 database. For those people that are familiar with SQL and relational databases, essentially it is a two-dimensional type of structure, like an Excel spreadsheet, where you have a record and then you have a field, and the nexus between those two gives you a value. With relational databases, you have tables that store different related information. So you might have one table that stores names, another table that stores addresses, and then a key field in both tables, common to both, that link the data from one table to the data in another table. In SQL, every time something's stored, any information is chopped up this way and stored in different tables, and then when you go to retrieve it, you run a query and joins and link all the stuff and essentially reassemble it off of the pieces. Multi-value universe databases, PIC systems, don't mangle data in that way. They tend to preserve things fairly intact, and don't ask me how. I still don't quite have it sorted out. In many ways, you can kind of think of every transaction as a kind of a separate file that's stored and then retrieved. Anyway, in the basic PIC database structure, what you would normally see, their language that they use for describing things, you have a master dictionary, and that describes the overall structure of the PIC system. Then you'd have a dictionary. Dictionaries you can kind of think of as not really like describing a table structure in a SQL database, It's more like describing the architecture of a filing system on a hard drive, because the PIC system was a operating system, is an operating system, and was hard drive oriented. This makes some kind of insane sense. From dictionaries, you have files and subfiles, and their analog would be tables in a relational database. You have items, which their analog would be records in a SQL database. And you have attributes, which would be fields, like fields in a spreadsheet. Where it gets weird is where relational databases tend to be two-dimensional, x, y, and at the nexus of those 2 points you store a value, only one value. With Universe and PIC, these are multi-value databases, and that means you can have many, an unlimited number of values stored in a location. So the attribute equals the field, the value equals the subfields, and the best way I kind of keep track of it in my head is I tend to think of a stack of paper, and not only do you have to find the location where the stack is, but you have to tell it how far down in the stack. Do you want value 1, value 2, value 3, as it, page 1, page 2, page 3 off the stack. As you can see, trying to translate SQL structure and that type of architecture and multi-value and back and forth will drive you wiggy. Over the years, as technology has changed and Eclipse has had other competitors, for many years Prophet 21 was considered the major competitor to Eclipse. The designers and the programmers of Eclipse were forced with a devil's bargain. They either had to completely rewrite the product, redesign all of the core programming to put it over a modern database, or Plan B. And unfortunately for us and for them, if you ask me, they picked Plan B instead. This has come down to a very unusual chopped up architecture for an Eclipse system. What these slides here are telling you, these points, is my understanding of the basic components and where they sit in any Eclipse rollout for any particular company. Usually you're forced with having to have a 2-server system. In the one system on the left, this is the core system. It runs on Red Hat Enterprise Linux and hosts the Universe PIC database. On top of that, you have the common Red Hat Linux programs that Universe uses for its various functions. Postfix for outbound mail, SEFax for running a fax server. You can use Eskerfax in place if you want to use a web-based fax system. And of course the product data warehouse and Eclipse reports, those all sit on the Linux system. On the other system, you have a Windows Server-based system, and you've got a Microsoft SQL Server, which they've done some very strange translation, which I believe it's an XML that translates information back and forth from PIC to the SQL Server. Then you have the IIS web server, and that's used for the Eclipse mobile product. And I think it may also be used to some degree with the e-commerce connector, but I'm not really sure. Wireless warehouse is another weird bugaboo. That's for the wireless scan, pick, and pull guns for the warehouse. A very neat product, although I'm given to understand that Eclipse becomes more unstable if you buy that product and try and roll it out. Document storage, most people buy the document storage to scan in the PIC tickets, proof of deliveries, and typically your file storage will be on that Windows server as well. MITS, which is a reporting tool from a third party, tends to also sit on this server as well. If you have a web storefront and you buy the Epicor Eclipse e-commerce connector, it's kind of a two-piece product. They host a Magento website, and one part of the e-commerce connector talks to the other part on your local Windows server, and then translates into XML, and then goes to the Universe database, and it's gobbledygook. The surprising thing is that it's actually pretty reliable, but it is a weird hodgepodge of technology, and if things do go wrong, good luck trying to find out where on earth the problem is. Eclipse is unusual in that it has at least two, if not more, we'll get into that later, interfaces to get into and do transactions in. Here in this slide you see the old style interface, which is referred to as eTerm. And yes, no doubt about it, it's ugly as sin. It is essentially a glorified telnet session. It talks directly to the Universe PIC database. But it is also extremely easy to read, very intuitive, and extremely quick. And for those people that have been on Eclipse for several years and started out in eTerm, they would rather have their eye teeth removed forcibly without anesthesia than to give up eTerm for the other interface. Here's a representation of the current version Solar interface as of 2017. And as you can see, it's all pretty modern graphical user point-and-click style interface. They've tried to make it the fields, the descriptions, and kind of the formats as close to eTerm as they could, even though it's a completely different interface. As said before, you know, the programmers had a devil's bargain in that they, in order to try and make the PIC system and Eclipse look more modern and be able to compete with modern applications like the QuickBooks and Profit 21s and everything else that you'd see out on the market, they had to have a graphical interface, but they didn't want to rewrite the whole core application and programming and get it off PIC to do so. So this was their bargain. They wrote an interface in Java, and actually, considering what it is, it's actually pretty good. It was a fairly well thought out implementation, and considering what it's doing, which is some little bit of insanity if you ask me, trying to translate 30-plus-year-old code that was designed in text mode and get it to go through JBoss and talk through Java to this graphical interface is really quite amazing. And it does work pretty well. It does have some glitchy parts to it, which I won't get into now. It is not quite as reliable or nice to work with, fail-safe, I guess you could say, as eTerm was. But it does have a lot of enhancements and is pretty good. The downside, as I've said, though, is that even despite the fact that this is Java, it'll only run on Windows, just like eTerm will only run on Windows. So if you've got Macs, if you're trying to implement iOS tablets, well, good luck. Although you could use a product like Eclipse Mobile, which I would consider the third user interface into Eclipse, or an e-commerce solution as a way of making it more operating system neutral if you wanted to. Now, in final mention about the two interfaces, I should say that Eclipse has officially discontinued all further development of the eTerm interface, and they are at the moment trying their damnedest to get their remaining 33% of their user base of 66,000 users that are holdouts with eTerm to get them off of and use Solar exclusively. And all of the new features and enhancements and adjustments they've done to the Eclipse Universe database, some screens, some fields, some bits of information, some functions are only accessible in Solar now. And so that's a big deal. So you will be using Solar in the future regardless of where you're coming from. In any new implementation, you'll be almost Solar exclusively. Now, having said that, even Eclipse cannot completely get rid of eTerm, because there are low-level functions. There are things like mass loads, which I won't get into what those are, certain low-level reports, system maintenance, and direct communications and queries with the PIC TCL interface that require access to eTerm. They just simply couldn't find a way of making it work in SOL or any other ways. So if you're a systems administrator for Eclipse, you can bet that you're going to be working in both interfaces, whether you want to or not. But for most other job functions within the company, they could easily never touch eTerm and would never know what it is. So the conclusion to this brief introduction and overview on Epicor Eclipse and PIC systems, this is the general takeaway of all of it. The good. Eclipse is an extremely reliable system. From my experience, it has fairly low maintenance. It almost never goes down. When it does, it's usually something very minor. It usually only affects one record or something. In 12 years of me operating the system, I have only had an outage for 45 minutes. And that's incredible. And it's required almost no database maintenance in all of those years. The usage of the system is fairly intuitive. People tend to pick up on it fairly quickly, and it kind of guides you through the steps almost intuitively. It uses industry best practices for wholesale distribution, at least for electrical and plumbing, and you really, when you buy Eclipse, you're not buying a piece of software. You're really buying into a whole methodology for running a warehouse and a wholesaler business. And honestly, I can say that their practices have been spot on. You really, once you understand how it's doing it, what the thinking behind it was, you really can't argue with the way they've set this code up. And it is, at least for electrical distribution, pretty much an industry standard. Way back in the day when my company chose Eclipse, it was the Cadillac product, and even today I would say it's still pretty much considered that, at least amongst the people who use it or have had some familiarity with it. Having said that, the bad, and the bad is, of course, it's based on dead technology. The world has shifted years ago to SQL. Nobody knows anything about PIC basic programming. And this is a real issue, and this probably the problems that Epicor has trying to add new features and functionality into the future. The system has very limited customization. You can do little tweaks and things like that, but you'd find, and doing anything dramatic, and dramatic is not as large as you'd think, is either not possible or extremely expensive or incredibly unwise. When you buy Eclipse, as I said, you're really buying into a whole way of running a warehouse, and by altering the code you will break the internal processes. And not recommended. If you want something that's customizable, get SAP or such. It's a hodgepodge design. As I said, they took an outdated core technology that was reliable, and rather than discarding it, they've added layers to the onion in order to try and keep it modernized and up-to-date looking, and add new features. They've had to stick all these other little bits of technology on, and so now you've got this dual server system and some really weird stuff going on behind the scenes. The good part is it works. The bad part is if it stops working, you hardly ever have a chance in hell of figuring out for yourself what went wrong. You've got to go to Eclipse tech support, and well, that's next on the list. Eclipse is not cheap. The core product is expensive. You'll find almost everything that you want to do outside of the core is, oh, that's an add-on feature of 5 to 10 to 15 grand at a shot. Almost every component that you buy, you pay for the software, you pay for the per user access licenses, you pay a monthly maintenance, or well, they charge quarterly, but essentially it boils down to monthly maintenance for each product and each enhancement. And you virtually cannot implement any of their additional components without having to hire Eclipse tech support, normally on site, minimum of 2 days. So that $10,000 add-on that you had to have, you can also bet on spending another 10 to 15 grand before you're over and done with, before you even have it working. That's annoying and quite a surprise for people when they trip across it, and you will trip across it quickly. Sketchy support. The tech support staff is overloaded at Epicor, has been for quite a while. They keep trying to find ways of solving that without actually spending money, and strangely enough this doesn't work so well. So it's gotten better than it was, but still you're looking at, when you put in a trouble ticket, you really don't know when they're going to get to you or if they're going to fix it. One of the things that Epicor did in the past year and a half or so is they seemed to have jettisoned almost anybody that knew anything with the core product, and tech support suffered horribly. When the customers finally started screaming, they hired what they call ITS, India Tech Support, and staffed that up. And India Tech Support gets a bad name. Honestly, my dealings with them, yes, the accents are a little heavy, but actually they've been pretty sharp guys. Unfortunately, they're at a disadvantage because Epicor fired most of the people that knew most of anything before they hired these people, and being outdated technology, there's been no one around, or very few people around to train the people that now have to support the product. So you get some very things that shouldn't take like as long as they should to fix, sometimes take quite a while to fix. This usually doesn't result in a system outage. This is usually a transaction that gets stuck for a while, or a particular sub-function that's not working quite right, and it'll take them a little while to get to it. But I have never actually seen it get as bad as a system outage. The worst bad of the list, I can honestly say, is Epicor. Epicor is their own worst enemy when it comes to this product. This has been a fantastic product, as I said. In my 34-year career, it's been probably the best program that I've ever had to support as far as reliability and usability, and general joy. Actually, my customer base, they may not have understood it while they were learning it, but once they've gotten the routine down, really do enjoy the product. Epicor, on the other hand, though, has made it quite clear on many occasions that they see Eclipse as being number 4 man in a 3-man race, including to the point at the last conference that I was at. Almost every opportunity Epicor got, they trotted out the look at all the neat new features we're adding to Prophet 21, and then after all that they might make some casual mention of, oh yeah, and by the way, Eclipse still exists. Whether they intend to throw any serious money at extending Eclipse, the safe money I would say was no. Are they planning on getting rid of it? No, they're not idiots. They do want to make money. They do have a base of 66,000 loyal customers. And if they announced discontinuing Eclipse, those 66,000 people would probably find Epicor headquarters and string up the senior management by their entrails. There's that kind of loyal following for the product. So Eclipse isn't going away, but what kind of a future it has is arguable at the moment. If you currently have Eclipse, well, you got plenty of time. Stick with it. You don't have to panic. If you're not on Eclipse and you're looking at it as a new implementation, you want to have some serious, strong discussions about the long-term viability of this platform. because it's really hard to say. As I've said as many times as they've been bought and sold over the past 10 years, you really don't know what's going to happen next. But of course that's true for most things these days. There will be more presentations to come that will get into some of the more details of various functions. I hope this has been helpful, or at least not wildly misleading and completely wrong, and good luck on your decisions.